All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, Hillary. Welcome. My name is Kristen Taylor, and I am the curator of academic programs and collections at the Museum of Contemporary Photography here at Columbia College Chicago. And I am really excited today to be in conversation with Hillary Irene Johnson about her exhibition, Unity, Roots, Seaweed, Dinosaur Feathers, Snow in the Woods, Axons, Dendrites, and Human Beings, which is currently on view at the C33 Gallery at 33 East Ida B. Wells, on view until April 29th. And their hours are Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. So there will be a quiz at the end of this program for everyone to remember the title of that exhibition.
I can't even remember it.
Really happy to be in conversation with you. We have pre-recorded this event just due to schedule logistics, but as we're live streaming it, Hillary will be available for questions. So if anyone has questions throughout this talk, she will be able to respond to those live and in the chat. So with that, are you ready to get started?
I am. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm really honored, honestly. Thank you.
So Hillary and I have known each other for 3 years now,
3 years. Yeah.
correct? Um, she's worked at the Museum of Contemporary Photography with me as an educator, and during this time, I've gotten to know all of these different facets of your brain, like all the different things you're interested in. So with that, I feel like the title of the exhibition is such a great example of how your brain works. So I was hoping to start with that you could tell us a little bit about this title and how you landed on this specific sequence of words.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I think that I had been struggling to come up with a title that would be simple and elegant, the way I wanted the installation itself to be simple and elegant. But I couldn't find a single word or even a small handful of words that seemed like it got to it. And I thought that it would make more sense actually. And I was in conversation with Melissa Potter, who teaches in art and art history and is a high priestess of paper making and handmade books and all kinds of things. And she said, we were naming the objects as we were doing a studio visit. And she's like, I think that's really how you can do this, is just list all the things and seeing the relationships and just letting that language be out there so that viewers, visitors to the installation could then begin to form their own connections.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you mind putting some images up? So for anyone who hasn't yet seen the show, we have a nice little slideshow of images, and maybe we can just start with that first slide of what it's like when you walk into the room.
Sure. Let me make this big. Oh wait, I think okay. So here's the view when you first walk in. Yeah.
So it's such a special exhibition, and this is a campus art gallery. So we've seen over the years this space transformed by people studying here at Columbia in so many different ways. And it's so special to see how people adapt this space. And something that just took my breath away when I walked in is this hanging of fabric that you have here. So for anyone who hasn't seen the show yet, there's a video projected onto this layering of the fabric. And so you have these kind of 3 different layers of the video that you can move in between. Can you tell us a little bit about your idea for this piece and also specifically the sound that's involved in this video?
Yeah, absolutely. And later we have a little kind of a clip that shows some of it. But the idea, I had experimented with video projections in the past, and I'm really thinking partly about how video is actually a sequence of still images. And so that as I was working with the video itself in Premiere, I decided that I wanted to really slow the frame rate down so that I became aware of, and that a viewer could almost become aware of this sequential thing. I'm a kind of Edward Muybridge fan. I think a lot about time and how things move in sequence. And so what happens when I slow it down and then project it it's like you're moving because each layer, like the first layer is really short, a small image, and then it gets bigger and bigger until it covers the entire wall. And so I like this idea of layering through time and space, the same way you might experience as you're actually moving through a physical place if you were walking, but then also thinking about, how do I want to say, it's like, the layers of the fabric, the silk, are also in conversation with the other handmade paper pieces that are in the exhibition. And I love Korean and Japanese and Chinese, like sumi brush paintings and landscape work, where very often there's an idea in how the inks are applied, where you layer things up and you want it to look complex, but actually have it be done in the most simple, elegant way possible. So this allowed me to think about the material of these different things that are interesting for me as well at the same time.
I feel like you went right into a question that I had at the top of my head this whole
Hmm.
time knowing you, is that your different ways of working with material is really special. So as you talked about, these are silk, and then you can see in this image there are light boxes on the floor of these kind of like branches that we'll get to later in the slides.
Hmm.
But the exhibition includes this video projected onto the silk fabric, light boxes, and then you also have beautiful black and white photographs in the windows that you can kind of move through a curtain and see. And you're an artist who really embraces so many different types of materials that it's never just a photograph, it seems. So I'm curious, with when you're choosing to create a project, do you start with the material, or do you usually start with the idea and then figure out which material is best suited for that concept? Or what's kind of your process of discovery with materials?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in, especially now where so much is virtual and digital and kind of disembodied, that to me, I'm really, in terms of when I think about materials, I'm really also interested in, Kelly Connell had talked about this with me a couple of years ago, and then Kai Ito and I had talked about this. It's like that maybe there's a part of me that's a little bit about performance, but not performance the way like I would normally think of a performance artist who, come and see them do something. I just want that in this time, especially we're in sort of Anthropocene moment where we're dealing with climate issues, that the idea that the individual actions of the artist, that the hand of the artist, and that the labor that's involved in making a thing really matters. And I think that can be really interesting, also kind of thinking about like sort of feminist history of making, and to be able to make things and using materials in a way that provides a kind of a unity of expression there as well. That it's almost like a visual automatopoeia, if there's a word for that.
Mhm.
And so I think that I don't know that I have a neat answer to like what's that way of working. I think it's different for each thing. So with the silk, I've been working with silk for a few years here at Columbia and tried a lot of things that didn't quite work, but I'm really interested in layering and transparency and how you can see through it, but it also is obscuring a little. And I think that speaks in part to my own kind of personal experience growing up and trying to make sense of things, and really being interested in, how we perceive, like how I perceive reality and what's going on. So I love that we can become aware of the layers, for example, with the silk, and thinking about layers of meaning, layers of experience, thinking about memory, time and space, and so forth. And I like the fact that the silk moves ever so slightly. It was a really deliberate choice to use something so sheer so that just the HVAC would make those curtains move a little bit so that it's more dynamic, and being able to have people walk through between those layers matters to me a great deal. With the large handmade paper piece that we'll see in a bit, that all kind of came like as a download all at once. Like I picked up the plants that I photographed, and I immediately knew that I wanted to make them like in this exact way. So
Mhm.
sometimes that happens, it kind of varies. But I think about what the materials, what their appearance means for me,
Mhm.
and how that will communicate something about the photograph, like with the dinosaur feather, the sandhill crane feather, like that really matters, that materiality, and even like with the mulberry paper, how that is made and how that's a process that's really ecologically sustainable, that it's not destructive, that it's much more reciprocal. And so as an artist, I think being able to work that way with materials and aware of what the costs and damages are, is also important.
Mhm. So can we look at, I know you have some slides of different details in the exhibition, but since you talked about the handmade paper and the roots, can we look at that image next and talk about it a little
Sure.
bit?
Let me just jump. Oops, here we go.
Should have worn my questions around this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah.
Great.
So this, I feel like, yeah, you started to talk about something that I hoped we could talk about more, of this idea of making sense of the world through your work. And I think
Mhm.
that title again kind of says so much about your process of discovery and investigating. And I've said something about your work, about how I think you work a little bit like a detective and a shaman, at the same time. Like you're kind of like investigating, but you're also working to sort of have this sense of connection to these things around you, and this like effort to make us all feel more connected to one another, the human being part in the title, but also
Okay.
like the snow in the woods and the roots. And so you see this root on the ground, and then what happened next? Can you walk us through sort of how you made this piece? And
Yeah, sure. And it's so interesting because it's like that unity of experience is something that means a lot to me. And I think that, growing up, like it's something that I had a deep inner knowing about, that's kind of unity of how the universe is put together, and not having that view really supported. It took some kind of resilience and determination, later in life to just be like, well, nope, this is really how I feel. And there's all this physics and all this wisdom traditions that talk about this. And I think for women also, who traditionally in many cultures hold this kind of wisdom and like real knowing about how things work, that's something I feel really excited to be part of that history if I can you know. But with this particular piece, what happened is it was actually kind of a friend of mine calls it the Christmas miracle. That I went into the garden on Christmas Day where I live in Pilsen with my husband, and we grow a lot of things in containers. And we didn't really clean up the garden at the end of the season because grad school. And so I went out and picked up this pair of plants. It's two lemon balm plants. So it's a medicinal herb, it's soothing, it's a tonic. And I just looked at them together and how the roots were entangled and was so struck by its beauty. I was really moved to tears, honestly. And I brought it inside and I held it up against a white wall. And I was like, it's just gorgeous. It's like a sculpture, it's a drawing. And I got some museum putty and I kind of put it up and really just looked at it. And I thought, this thing is so small and humble that some people just be like, it's just garden refuse, but it's so incredible. It reminded me of Cy Twombly drawing, and I wanted to really honor the plant. And I think I really like that idea in general with like ordinary things that are right in front of us all the time, that we don't have to go someplace exotic to find something that's sacred or beautiful. And I was like, oh, I want to photograph this and I want to break it into segments and piece it together the way you see it here and have it be like a real presence. So it's like the piece is about 10 feet tall, I mean, 9.5 feet by about 8.5 feet. So it's really it's like having a spirit or something in the room. It's a real presence.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and you have the actual plant hanging on the wall too. Do you have an image of
I
that?
do. Yeah, here's a little detail. Here's the actual plant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's falling apart now because I gathered it on Christmas Day. And so now you can see there's places where it's starting to come undone a little. But I was just so taken with how the roots are entangled.
Mhm,
And, the title for the paper piece is The Natural Order of Things is Connection,
mhm,
because I was really, really struck by how the roots are reaching out for each other.
mhm,
And that I like the word desire for that, because I think it is, and maybe this is too broad a generalization, but this idea that living beings are all reaching out for connection, whether that's human beings or other non-human animals and plants. We know that trees communicate. So there's so much sentience. I guess that makes me a bit of an animist. But there's so much of that that I just see all of that in this one thing. And I thought, oh, we should really, I really want to honor that and invite people to have their own experience of getting in touch with their own desire for being seen or making contact.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way you have it hung, it to me almost looked like lungs and like, of course, like the nerves that we have
Mhm.
through our own bodies, and then that human beings, and like it's so much like a human body to me when I look at this. But again, it depends on what you
Yeah.
bring to the looking experience of how you see it. Um,
Yeah, and I did a lot of research because I was so struck and it's like, am I dreaming this or is it actually, you know, what I think is it looks like, axons and dendrites. It looks like nerves in the human body and there's different kinds of nerves, throughout. But in fact, I could almost, and I think maybe for a future piece, there'll be some kind of work with like overlaying with actual
Mhm.
imagery somehow or doing some kind of stitching or something to really heighten those connections.
Mhm. So can we move next to the light boxes on the floor? Because they also to me spoke of those axons and dendrites. Like it felt like you were continuing that thread here. Is that correct? Or what are you thinking of when you were making these pieces?
Yeah, so with this one, this is three separate light boxes, and the photographs themselves are of tidal pools in Nova Scotia, Canada. I was up there co-leading a retreat last summer, and I got some time to spend on the coast in Lunenburg, which is just so beautiful. It's a fishing area traditionally, and in this one particular area, there's along the coast, the government really wants to have more people coming to be able to like bring their like big campers and so forth. And so they've made some interventions in the landscape there by placing objects that are kind of barriers and so forth, like not too dissimilar in some ways to what we see in Chicago sometimes, where there's an intervention that's meant to provide access, but at the same time, that intervention can cause damage to the actual landscape that they're inviting people to come to. And so I was talking with people who live there who were describing this, and I was thinking about just impermanence and the change that could be happening. And so the irony of we want people to come, but now we've done something that actually may cause more of a degradation or erosion in this space. And so then I just went out and looked, I climbed up on some rocks and just was watching in these tidal pools the way the waves would move through and just like surge through the seaweed that's gathering there. And I love this kind of sequence of that there's nothing, there's just water and seaweed, and then the wave comes and then the third box, it's completely, moving all you can see is the water surging across it. And so this idea, I think I'm really interested in like the sequence and thinking about how change happens, and how, there's a longer time frame of what might be happening with the landscape, but that we can see that in a moment, because it only took like a few seconds for this to go like
Mhm.
whooshing kind of through. But this idea of slowing down to really pause and observe this and be with it and see how that feels in the body, to just sit with, a visual of the natural world moving and changing constantly, which is something that causes a lot of struggle for us human beings. When things change constantly, we're suffering with that. So,
Mhm. Mhm. I love
and
how you have it installed. It's hard to tell from this, but we were standing and looking down on it. So it's so interesting to hear you then talk about that was your vantage point of making it with this kind of intervention that had been created as a boundary. Um, can you talk about your choice for creating it as a light box and what you want the role of the light actually illuminating the photograph to do?
yeah, I it was so interesting because like the way water looks, and
Mhm.
it was not a super sunny day, but there's such a luminous quality to the water, even on an overcast day, that when I printed the images, I tried a lot of different tests on different materials. That felt like to me there was something kind of missing. And there's also some teaching that I'm really interested in from a spiritual tradition that talks about how like really and this is true how physics talks about things too. This is like this intersection of sort of what we think of as sort of magic or spirituality and science is that, the phrase is the universe shines with reflected light. And that, there's this luminous quality that's in all things and in all of us. And so wanting to heighten that sense of luminosity, that it's a bit of an invitation, not only see the beauty and the luminous quality of the simple seaweed in these waves and just the movement. And I mean, I just love the visual qualities of it as well, just seeing the subtle changes from moment to moment, but that it's a bit of an invitation for people to connect to their own inner light, how the world would be different if we all could connect to that more, right?
It's beautiful, which I think segues a little bit to the photographs of the waters we swim in. Can we look at those next? Because I think that's such a nice thread line to this project that you've been doing for quite a while now. And you've been doing it for a while, but they're all so unique. Like each image really holds its own energy of like really being with that person that you're photographing. So could you tell us a little bit about this project that you're doing, which is more of the shaman side that I was talking about earlier, and a lot about what you were just talking about of our own light?
Yeah, so I started this. I actually had a dream years and years ago where I saw a woman floating in water, and the image just stayed with me for a very long time. And then in 2017 or 18, I went to a photo retreat and I met a woman and got to be friends with her there. And I was like, I told her about this dream I had and how she looked just like this woman from this vision I had. And I said, would you be willing to get in the water with me? And she said, sure. So we made the first set of images, and actually that's her right there.
Wow.
She's a wonderful photographer also, Christina Egarola Sue, and she is just so fierce. She's a mom of triplets, and has so much story. And so this was just the very first one that gave me a sense of the potential that could be here. And then I kept doing it since that year, whether it was 2017 or 18, I can't quite remember. But that what started to happen is that as I was inviting more people into this process, and I teach meditation and mindfulness, and I kind of coach people some, and I'm really interested in the healing capacity of art and experiences. Transformative experiences are really important to me, and holding space for others to have some kind of a moment of transformation where they can release something that's been troubling them or holding them back. And then in that empty space, they can call something in that's a strength. And it became more and more of a ritual. And people started saying to me that this is what was happening. Like I didn't intend it like consciously, it just organically began to happen. And people said, wow, like something really shifted for me and I feel really different. And I thought, well, I need to do this very much on purpose and be intentional, because if you're dealing with someone's energy, really wanting to hold space for them. And so it's become a ritual process that they're invited to, where there's long conversations and a guided experience, including some questions that I hope are really opening. But it allows me to really hold space and be present for that person and whatever is arising for them. And that when we get to a place where they feel like, oh, I've identified what it is that I want to let go of, and what they want to call in, then we go into the water. And it's a very collaborative process where I don't really ever say, do this or do that. It's not like a portrait session in that way. What I feel like it's more about is witnessing for them and holding the space. And so I'm really aware as we're working of what are the stories that they've told me and what's going on for them. And sometimes I might say, because I'm really into somatic healing, it's like, how would it feel if you did this? And that's the closest I'll get to a suggestion, so that they're really attuning to their own intuition internally and like feeling like, what does their body need to do or move in order to feel that sense of release.
So for anyone who's not familiar with your work, and you're interested in this is something that you offer as kind of a collaborative experience. And the people that you photograph, they also keep the photograph, right? It's also
they so it's an ongoing. My hope for this is that people ask, when will I be done? And I say I'll be done when I've been to every country in the world where there's water and human beings, because I feel like there's something. I imagine an exhibition one day where people from all over can see how beautiful they are, and
Mhm.
that, you know, the stories that could go along, like with permission, of course. But that, yeah, one of the things that's really important with this as an experience is that's not just what happens in the water, but that immediately I run home or wherever I'm at and I edit quick. I find one or two, maybe three
Mhm.
images that seem like something's really there so they can see themselves.
Mhm.
And then they receive a print, or sometimes now I'm making handmade books. So they have that. So it becomes, it can be like a daily touchstone for them to remember, like in their body, oh, that's what it felt like to feel so free and expansive and good. So they can continue to see their own luminous quality, their own inner light, and have that as like, okay. And then they can reconnect to that and then go forth in their day with more strength.
Beautiful.
And I set them, I mean, there's a lot of images, and it was hard, honestly, to choose, but I wanted these to be outside facing the street because I feel like when I look at this particular series and I think about the moment that we're in, um, each of these people has a powerful story. This man came from another country, like has a big immigration story that's very profound. He does beautiful work. He makes things out of wood and is an incredible artist. Um, and I just love, you can like just the way this image works for me, of like the water upwelling and how he's like really present for his own experience and everything that he's gone through.
Mhm.
And then like this strong woman, and people talk about Ophelia sometimes, but I was like, what if Ophelia's story was flipped and we
Mhm.
changed that narrative and she's super
Mhm.
fierce?
Mhm.
And then this little girl, she was 9 years old when I photographed her, and she just had so much gravitas. She and her mom now live out of the country. They're in Austria. But she just had so much poise. And I was like, oh, here's this hope for the future, this young girl who knows who she is. And she was wearing a mermaid costume. It was so sweet.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and then this woman, I photographed her in Nova Scotia last summer, and she has her own incredible immigration story coming from her home country to Canada. And so we did all the ritual, and then she said, oh, I just need to say a prayer for a moment. And I said, okay. And I just wanted to give her some space, but then when I saw her, I had to make a picture, and then I asked her if it's okay, like to share that. And she said it was.
It's so interesting that you're not giving them cues of how to move their body, and they all seem to really intuit that sense of, I don't know, they all have some kind of similarity, I think, in how they're moving their bodies, and maybe it's just the edit that you're doing, but it's quite poetic seeing them together and seeing this kind of like how he was embracing himself and how she's holding her hands. Like it, you would never know that they're just doing that on their own. So it's a testament.
Yeah, I think, you know, the only gesture that I've ever coached almost everyone to do, because it was something that started with the very first set, was this kind of heart opening, you know, thing. And sometimes can be a little too Christian in its vibe, you know, and I think in a way that can become problematic. But that there's something about just, I want to invite people into that space of feeling that they can float, they feel the water supporting them, they trust the water, they trust their body, and that they can be open that way because it's such a vulnerable place, the heart, the throat,
Yeah.
but to be able to relax in that. So there's a lot of that, but I have to be careful of like how I sequence them or make choices in an edit
Mhm.
so that it shows a greater range of human emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's something that that idea of sequencing and editing that is really strong in this exhibition too, because from knowing you, I know that you are you're always making a lot of work. You have books, you have, you know, this giant hanging tapestry in one of the other campus buildings. Like you're one of the most active artists I know. And this exhibition is so minimal in a great way, like minimal
Mhm.
not in a way that um feels like force, but just like you give a lot of space around everything that I think is somebody to kind of the title of this talk about like this curatorial discussion, like there is that part of being an artist and editing and kind of curating your own work and presenting. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you put this exhibition together and your choices for settling on these specific works with such a huge catalog of work to choose from.
Yeah, I know that many of the professors I've worked with here at Columbia, particularly Jay Wilkie, who is the whole reason I'm here, and I really dedicate this show to him and his mentorship and leading me forward, and sometimes being very challenging. But that it is definitely like I do make a lot of work, and I came to grad school. It's not like I'm like 20 and I'm like, I feel some press of time, just simple mortality, but also that I had wanted to do this for so long that I was like, I'm going to use my time while I'm doing my MFA to turn over every rock of my interest. And that became very challenging because, and I've actually discovered, I guess, that there's like sort of a term, like some people are more hierarchical in their thinking. My brain definitely works more like the way a forest works with all the fungi underground and moving like very far and wide, and then also like highly networked from thing to thing. So I see connections between things that other people might be like, those have nothing to do with each other. I'm like, of course, it's right here. Can't you see this?
Mhm.
So there's that, and then there's like this tendency to be kind of a maximalist
Mhm.
that I think I spent a lot of time trying to prove myself, or feeling like, making an on purpose demonstration of, look at all the things that I've made, in a way that was not extremely healthy, but it was just something I had to work through. And I wanted to feel like I really turned over every possibility. It's kind of like a squirrel out in the woods gathering a lot of different nuts. And it's like at some point realizing, okay, I have all of these things. And like Paul D'Amato had said to me, like, hell, you've made all this stuff. What do you love the most? And so I thought about that question a great deal. And as I looked around at the different things, what I felt like I really wanted to do was create a space that would feel serene, that would give people some space themselves to sit, and that's why there's two benches in the space.
Mhm.
And then I was like, how can I make this simple and elegant, like the way some of the work that I love, that I feel connected to, whether it's different kinds of Japanese, Korean, or Chinese, like scroll paintings, things like that,
Mhm.
that I wanted, that they're, in Japanese traditions of that kind of painting, it's not just the objects or the things that are depicted, the branches or the flowers, it's the space between.
Mhm.
And so I felt like I wanted to design the whole space so it would, like the whole thing is the piece. Like there's objects and things that you can sit and look at, but I wanted it to work together really comprehensively that way.
Yeah. And it does. I love that to get to these pieces, you have to move through these curtains, and then you kind of go through this little passageway where, again, usually people don't use the space in that way. They think of it as kind of just the windows and something maybe separate, but you're inviting people to kind of wander around and
Mhm.
explore the space in a way that you don't usually see. And then we haven't talked yet about the dinosaur feather, but that for me was the last image that I looked at, or the last
Mm.
piece. Can we talk about the dinosaur feather? Because I think like what you were just saying about how these connections that maybe people aren't usually making in the title alone, that's always the one that stands out. But I do know what you're thinking about in this piece, but I would love for you to explain it for people watching.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about the way I wanted the space to be is, it just occurred to me actually, is that I really love the architecture that I've seen in some like traditional, like very old-fashioned Chinese homes, like in the mainland, where there's a courtyard. And so the gallery is shaped a bit like that, where you have the outer walls, like where the people in the water face the street, and they're kind of guardians and messengers. And then there's the space inside where something more private and intimate happens. Um, and so, yeah, so this is a box with a dinosaur feather, and the feather is from the Field Museum. It's a sandhill crane feather. Sandhill cranes are the oldest living continuous lineage of birds on Earth, which is just amazing. And so they were almost extinct. And through the very lovely and loving attention of human beings who decided that it mattered, their numbers have completely rebounded. And actually, in some places, they're talking about hunting them again because there's so many of them. But it's really an example of a species that we could have just let go the way of so many species that are, they call it the next wave of great extinction. And the fact that we were able to turn that around through our care. Aldo Leopold, was a great conservationist and really made such a huge contribution to environmental management and resource management, and even stopped using the word resource, his ideas were very much aligned in many ways with indigenous thinking
Mhm.
of being more entangled, and that he talked about a land ethic in which if you really care for something, if you care for what you love, you will take care of. And that it's like when we don't know about something, we don't even witness it, well, we can't love it then, right? So we might do things accidentally that are detrimental. And so I just love how this single feather, you can't gather them, it's illegal because of their past endangered status and because of like the way they're migratory birds and so forth. But I was able to go to the Field Museum and photograph a number of their specimens, and they had this one really beautiful feather, and I knew it's so small and precious, and I just wanted to give it a home. And it's printed on a beautiful Korean mulberry paper so that the figure ground relationship becomes a little blurred because you can see the fibers of the paper mingling with the fibers, seeing the tendrils of feather in the actual feather. I don't know what the individual little bits are called, whatever, maybe some science person knows. Um, but then again, wanting to illuminate it and have its actual gold leaf surrounding the box, 24 karat gold leaf. So it's really like an honoring of this whole story and represented by this single feather.
Mhm. Which too, I think that gold leaf we associate so much with religious paintings, or at least I do. I think of
Hmm.
like how we usually reserve gold for like representing the divine. And so I love that you chose to not only illuminate it, because one day you walked in my office and like put the print against the window. You're like, should I do it like this or put it in a frame? And then like 3 days later or something, you make this. It's just kind of like astounding. The choices between that moment and then what became of it. It's so perfect, but I loved the addition of the gold leaf, and
Thank you.
color is not something that's present in your exhibition otherwise. It's very like earth tones, black and white, browns,
Mhm.
grays. So this is such a nice closing point, or kind of like, I don't know, a place to really like honor the little individual specimens, not only for like their connections to everything else, but also just like the intricate beauty within that individual form. So it's like almost like you zoom out and then you zoom back in when you're leaving the show. So
Yeah, and I think there's a picture,
mhm.
where's it? Maybe, yeah, well, maybe not. But when you're looking here, even when you first walk in, the fact that you can have, I was initially going to put the dinosaur feather someplace on a different wall, and then I got the wall behind, and I realized, oh, it's much better here because the wall is smaller and it doesn't feel so lost. But that also having these sight lines where you see the golden quality of the gold leaf, but also the luminosity from within that light box, the pieces on the floor, and then the warm tones of the handmade paper, the abaca. So it feels like the empty space of the wall behind became really important and that everything was really contained in this space.
Mhm. Mhm. So can we watch a little bit of the video that you made? Because that
Yeah.
will also give us a sense of like, we talked a little bit about the video piece in the show at the beginning, but there's this audio component that's part of the video that really infiltrates the whole gallery space. So I'd love for people to hear that for a minute.
Yeah, there's sound, so you'll hear the sound with a projection video is the sound of snow falling, wind through the trees, and sandhill cranes migrating last November. And then on the other side where the light boxes are, there's speakers hidden under the bench there. And I wanted the sound of the sea, but I didn't record audio in Nova Scotia specifically. But then I thought it would be better be more interesting to make music that would go along with it. So it's a sea drum, which my friend played, and we spent some time kind of getting the right rhythm so that you could hear that. So let me give it a second here. Oops. I'll make it all the way big. A little settle. now. Get out of that. Let's see.
We get to see behind the curtain a little bit of your YouTube history there.
Yeah. Yes.
There you.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. Oh, how do I get back? Okay.
Just switch tabs.
Oh, I see. I see. Hang on. All right, I got it. I have you kind of floating. You can see how not technical I am. This is why I hand make everything.
Yeah. There's no way to do
Don't
it.
make me do things that are virtual.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I feel like it's such an important layer to the exhibition, is that sound that really infiltrates the whole space. And it almost, like, I don't think that's what you were going for, but for me it felt like a little bit kind of haunting. Is that something that you hope to accomplish, like something that was kind of eerie as well, or is that just my own strange read on it?
No, I think that's not at all your own strange read. I think you're picking up exactly. I think, I think a lot about the complexity, in our mind, our brains like binaries. So it's like it's this or it's that, it's happy or it's sad. And that we are often chasing like the happiness and wanting to be away from what we label as the negative or painful emotions. But that they're also they inter B or they inter R, they're entangled. And that we can't have one without the other, right? Like you can't have music without silence, you can't have happiness and joy without some kind of heartache, and that those things sit together. And it's like in meditation, a lot of times the idea can be like, oh, equanimity, and not being capsized by things. And sometimes I think, I don't want equanimity. I want my heart broken. I want to feel joy and all of that. But the idea that we can face those things and not be capsized, but I think there is a haunt, maybe it's a melancholy, I think. It's like that kind of a hauntingness for me, where part of the reason I slow the frame rate down for the video is so that there is this sense of, adds to me a little bit of like precariousness, and that the sound is also slowed down, so it's not exactly as you would hear it. So I think like I worked for like 2 days, like sitting in my studio, like geeking out on audio for the first time. It's the first sound piece I ever made quite like that. But I think I do want people to have this sense of the beauty that it is a little melancholy, and it is like fragile, but also there's incredible resilience, and it really matters, like that kind of presence. So I think when someone feels that, it's like, oh, then what do I do with that emotion as I go forth in the world? So I think that makes a lot of sense. I love that you had that experience.
Good. I love how elegantly you described and answered that, because we did not go over these questions in advance, and I just am really impressed with the way that was so intentional, because I didn't know how you felt about that audio piece at all. And having that balance, because you do feel that, like, in looking at the dinosaur feather, part of you feels this like almost remorse for change, even though it's like something you said earlier, that change is this inherent part of nature and all living beings, that we're all temporarily here. And you get that sense
Right.
there's something about all of the elements coming together that is this sort of like feeling of awe and wonder, but also like you can't stop it. You can't freeze anything. It's all, in motion as we are. So that, again, like human being connection to everything else you really feel throughout. And I think that sound is so critical for tying it all together.
Yeah, I was really inspired by, I'm trying to remember now, I'm going to forget, of course, what is it, the 40-piece octet or something? The woman, you saw the piece, I think, where she had speakers all lined up, and they had it set up across from the World Trade Center where it used to be in New York, and it just turned out like people would come and cry.
I haven't
And
seen
then, like this piece is so beautiful, and she sculpts the space, and it's just like the power of sound to evoke emotion. I think it's something like I grew up as a musician, I played the piano and stuff. So I'm like, I used to sit and just like play single notes on the piano and just be like, what does that feel like? Like it's a really nerdy kid. But so I think I bring that sense. So it doesn't, I was surprised initially to start working with sound, but now I'm like, oh, of course I have to have sound with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really great. Well, I don't know how much longer you want to talk. We're at about 45 minutes now.
Oh, this is
Um,
good.
I I guess I've a few more kind of like wrapping up questions, unless there's
Mhm.
something we didn't touch on that you want to get into.
No, no, go
So-
ahead on. I love getting your questions. There's like nothing better than being asked great questions by someone.
I'm curious, two things. One is you're finishing up your graduate degree now in photography. You have another graduate degree from here at Columbia College in creative writing, and you have
Mhm.
this like really extensive background with all these different things. Like just today, you were like, "Oh, when I was leading that talk about, fertility," and it's like you have so many different layers to who you are.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice for people maybe starting their career in photography or starting their education in it, or people who might be like wanting to be more creative but feel afraid to take that leap into pursuing their creative fields? Like, any advice?
Yes. Oh, this what's the simple thing to say though that's also true is I just feel like, there's that quote from the what is I'm gonna even mess it up, like the it's the Gospel of John where it's like if you bring forth what is within you will save you, and if you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you.
Mhm.
And I
Beautiful.
think I first read that actually in Stephen Cope's book, The Great Work, I think it's called. Sorry, Stephen, for mangling that if it's not exactly correct, but it's really wonderful. And I read that and I went to one of his retreats and learned from him directly, and I was like, oh my God, this is so true. And so I just feel like everyone has that, right? Whether they want to be a photographer or some other kind of artist, or they're going to like be a landscaper or whatever it is. Like there's something that we each have. Like that's just like a divine reality,
Mhm.
and that everyone really needs to, I wish everyone could be supported in finding out what that is and just going for it. Because to me, the worst thing could ever happen is you get to the end of your life with regret.
Mhm.
And I've seen that in my own family, and it's so heartbreaking. And so I just think if you have whatever your itch is, your dream, your secret thing that you haven't, like, go and rip off the Band-Aid and go for it. Find the people who will support you. I mean, the great thing about education in a place like Columbia and working with the museum is that, like, I feel like very late in life, I grew up here. This place like healed me, and I was held to be the creative person that I dreamed of being. And there's nothing better than being in a supportive community. So I'm so grateful. I just think everyone should have that opportunity. So just try things, and like if you're not sure what it is, try stuff and then try something else, and
Mhm.
turn over all the rocks so you can figure out what it is that you love and go do that because the world needs those gifts.
I love it. And that leads perfectly to my last question for you,
Mhm.
which is you've you've been here for 3 years doing this
Mhm.
program and made so many incredible things in this time. And so this is just kind of the period at the end of the sentence, and a new sentence is starting. You're, I'm sure, going to do so many incredible things after this experience of graduate school. But what do you think you're going to work on next? Are there any like things already kind of on the burner that you're starting?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Rocks that you're
I
turning over?
More rocks. I think that the experience of creating this exhibition so intentionally and really embracing. I think I was so nervous about the opening and everything initially because it's such a public declaration of like, this is who I am, this is what I love. And I just love working with the handmade materials, the handmade paper and the books and things. So I feel like I I would definitely want to do some more work with the specimens at the Field Museum and continue to explore. I got really interested in the gestures, the physical gestures of some of the specimens of the sandhill cranes. So I'm wanting to make some bigger pieces with that. But I think that's one thing. I'm going to continue doing the waters we swim in. I always am the water portrait, that ritual, because I feel like that's just so ongoing, and being able to hold space for that and be able to travel at some point in maybe starting to exhibit that work. This is really the first time it's ever been shown publicly, so I've really kept that pretty close. So I'd like to do more with that as a way of also introducing the work to other people so that maybe they can just see the images, but that people could know about the process and be able to explore that if they want to. So yeah, some all kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm sure we will see lots of incredible things from you in the future. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this chapter or this sentence or whatever we call it that you're in. And sentence meaning like script, not, you know,
Yeah,
prison.
a stanza, a verse,
Yeah, I
a
realize
verse of a
that
song.
multiple interpretations, but thank
Hmm.
you. Thank you for having me in conversation with you. I hope everyone can come see this show. It's truly special to see in person, and just grateful to know you, Hillary. Thank you for this time.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Kristen. This has been a real honor. Thank you so much.
All right.
Stop my
Here,
sharing.
everyone. All right, so we can always edit, you know, the
Mhm.
ending, like trim the video, but yeah, are
Mhm.
you happy with that?
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was
You asked the
fun.
best questions.
Oh, thanks. Well, I felt like it was so easy because of knowing you and seeing that show. I think it was good that I didn't go with you because I would have asked you things as I was sitting there. And so it was
Hmm.
really fun to actually like not know the answers to anything and ask you. I mean, I knew some things from
Something. Yeah.
knowing your work, but like with the video, like your answer about haunting, I thought was so great. And I wasn't sure where that was going to go, you know? So